Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. I guess there's been a couple of questions sent our way in relation to COVID guidelines and players with a disability. And I suppose from the outset to say, under the principle of inclusivity with our IRFU charter, the COVID guidelines were inclusive and they were written for everybody. I suppose it's been a challenging time for the last couple of months for the rugby players and indeed the coaches and the parents involved with some of those players. But the guidelines were written for minis, youths, players with disabilities, adults. And we recognise that you may, in some instances, have to make some reasonable adjustment. But essentially, the process is around safe and fun return, and it's no more than with anybody, but particularly for players with a disability, it's essential to try and ensure that safe and fun environment when they're coming back to the club. So David was appointed right at the start of the COVID lockdown, but he is there for support for clubs, and he will talk about some specific examples of reasonable adjustment for clubs. But essentially, we're just reminding people of the COVID protocols, making sure that all the players have completed their declaration, the hand sanitisation, the one-way systems that you might have in place. They arrive ready to train. And Alan will talk to us about how their club manage that, and to get that message across might be done in a manner in which people can understand. We've also produced an easy read guide, and David has worked on a set of lesson plans that would show maybe some of the practical layout of sessions. So there are some resources in place, but essentially it is that message of safe and fun return to play for all under the COVID guidelines. And hopefully during the next half an hour, we'll have a chance to talk through some of those questions or practical implications of that.
Brilliant, Emery. I'll ask you a question if you don't mind. And this is just about, look, the guidelines are there. They're at irishrugby.ie/return to rugby. We'll be making copies of them available. The easy read version is there within the appendix section of those guidelines. And look, everything we deal with these days is all about guidelines. And in a certain way, it's all about the interpretation of guidelines. My personal favorite being, well, maybe we can get more than 15 players to a training session if the referee is a priest, and my question here is, how important is it just to, if what we're looking about here is an inclusive mindset and a practical approach to be inclusive for players with a disability, how important is it that we just consider that in the first place? And if we go in with that mindset, chances are we're going to come out with the right outcome.
Yeah. And I think that's true of all players. And I think it's around making sure that it's going to be that safe return, and it's going to be that fun return. Rugby is an enjoyable experience, and physical activity has been shown throughout the last period to be so important for connecting people back to their club, their physical activity and their mental health. So in terms of is it safe, is it fun, keeping those principles at the front while you're interpreting the guidelines to the best of your ability. And then if there's individual things that are specific to your club, we'll be in the background to try and help you answer that. And there will be some cases where players with a disability might need additional support, and therefore you will put some additional measures in place, making sure parents are nearby, but they're also safe and in a safe waiting area. And David has some examples of clubs that have already gone ahead and helped with those, putting those practical interpretations in place.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We're going to move on now to our next contributor and say good afternoon to Alan Craughwell. Alan, good afternoon.
I've been told to smile by Liam Marr, so Liam, I hope this smile is good enough for you.
It's all good advice from Liam, to be fair.
Yeah.
Alan, obviously you're here as chair of IRFU Disability. Obviously, this is something that you live and breathe on a regular basis in terms of your own club activity. But what we're here to chat about here is, I suppose, a general overview and the kind of the principles of inclusivity that Anne-Marie has been kind of alluding to there, and maybe we can just do a bit more of a deep dive on that.
Yeah, I suppose. Look, every one of us is probably put into a situation of shock when COVID-19 hit. No more so than players and people participating in sport. And I suppose this has been a massive leveler. You now have your underage teams, your minis teams, your seniors. We all have to all in it together, and we have to be inclusive, and we have to work together. So it's no more than the principles or the ethos of inclusion. Everybody does the same thing and we get the same results. There's a massive appetite for I know from the mixed ability guys to return to rugby. Some of us have definitely have COVID bellies and need to go run them off, you know. So it's just get back in there, get training, do it in a safe manner. And one of the things is what we've been doing throughout this whole lockdown is making sure that we've kept in touch with each other, which is so important, because that's what sport is, isn't it? Like it's an extension of our own families in a way, and it's, you know, it's that important to people with disabilities and people without disabilities to just be connected. So we had a novel way of doing that over the period of time. We had a Zoom call every Friday night, and it was like instead of going to the pub or down to the bar in Sunday as well, we all brought a drink to the whatever desk we were, and we opened it out to club members, not just the mixed ability team, and it was great. You know, we got a real insight into the club during that time. You know, we had a president's night where we invited all the presidents and ex-presidents of the club. You know, guys got to know the history of what the whole club is about, and you know, it was a lovely way of just people just checking in and just saying hi, and you know, making sure that we're all still thinking about rugby. You know, we got the whole, I can't wait for it to come back, I hate this bloody COVID-19 thing, but you know what, we kept in touch with each other. We kept the club at the heart of it, and it was a very worthwhile and a good experience, and it really included people. Like, we had members who were self-isolating themselves during the period of time, and you know, this was a great way for them. Instead of, you know, they weren't able to go down to the clubhouse to have a drink, so why not have it with people who know you and who are your club members and able to speak and talk about club things. So it was fantastic from that point of view.
Alan, just for the uninitiated amongst us, the club and clubhouse to which you refer.
Sundays, well,
yeah,
RFC down in Cork.
And
open for business. We take everybody.
When we talk about opportunities, you know, in relation to #return to rugby, what that says to me is that, you know, we're checking in with each other, but actually now more than ever before, we're checking in with each other as humans rather than rugby players. And maybe there's a tendency for all of us to kind of see each other with the training kit on and only refer to each other in rugby terms on our training nights. But actually what you're talking about here is we're just checking in with each other as people and connecting as people.
Ross, it's simpler than that. You know, it's membership. You're a member of a club, regardless if you have a disability or don't. You know, it's you're included. Yeah, you're a part of something. You're part of a family, whether it's Malone or whether it's Bantry or whether it's, you know, Shannon or Corkon. You're part of something. So it's about being connected to that, and it's that, as we say in Sunday, it's the welcome of that, and it's just bringing it to a different platform, really. It's all we could do, and we did what we could do with, you know, in the circumstances and the times, you know.
Yeah. Can we look, you know, I suppose that's maybe bringing us up to now, and we are kind of getting back into action, and, you know, competitive fixtures are going to be permitted from September 5th. So, I mean, what are the opportunities now that, you know, programs are coming back, clubs are coming back? What are the opportunities going forward in terms of how we can be more inclusive?
Look, there is definitely an appetite for people to play sport, and people really want to get back into competitive games. And I suppose if it is something that we're a bit more connected and we can organise fixtures, I suppose I can only speak for mixed ability. You know, we've struggled with getting fixtures. We're lucky now that we have near neighbours in the West Cork Jesters that we hope to welcome up very soon, or come down. I see our neighbours are on there. Nobby, how are you doing? So look, it is about that. It's about connecting with people. Initially, it's about getting back onto the field, getting training. Guys are going to have to get a little bit some sort of conditioned and fit again. And it's about getting back onto the pitch. And we've done some different things, and Dave will touch on them again, where, you know, a lot of what's happening is gone online, and not everybody lives online. You know, some people are very fortunate to live off grid. And that might be for certain reasons. You know, it might be for access reasons. They might be able to access the internet, or may not have smartphones, or may not have, you know, internet or levels to understand. So knowing your club and knowing where you can step in and help out. You know what, pick up the phone, text, do whatever communication is necessary, whether it's to the person themselves or guardian, and walk them through some of the online platforms like, Club Force we're using, and we're using, the sign up for registration. People will need help to walk through all them things, and especially coming to training every Friday or whatever day you go training, they need help to walk through, doing their COVID checks beforehand. So just conscious of that.
Thanks, Alan. Your club mate Liam Maher has made a point here around gearing up for the first session, finding it difficult getting players, both with and without disabilities, to engage with the COVID-19 protocols, mainly the online COVID questionnaire pre-training. We can come back to that in our Q&A section. I think now it's time to bring in David McKay, if that's all right. And thank you, Alan, for that. We'll chat to you again in a while. David is the IRFU Disability and Inclusion Officer. I mean, and David, it's great to have you on. And I suppose, we've kind of done an overview, and let's continue now with the idea of kind of practical examples, because this is something that you're doing on a daily and weekly basis with clubs and helping them through this process.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly it's something that when players have finished shielding, that they still need to exercise. And looking at clubs, like using the Zoom calls that Alan have been using, other clubs have been setting challenges on that, and either going by sponsored walks or using the step count. It's really just to keep them involved and keep them as part of that team is such an important thing. I think when it comes down to actual practical things, working with Portadown Rugby Club, they were looking at how to reduce where parents park the car, little simple things. So, for example, they have a separate car park for parents, and they have a coned area at the side of the pitch where parents can stand and watch the session, but as well as maintaining a social distancing, but also being able to see by the player. Like Banbridge, I've been supporting players having difficulty with that declaration forms by using their WhatsApps and using their club apps. Simple practical things of using channels for passing drills. Simple using coloured bibs for groups to be able to group players together to keep them organised, and also just to help in a simple way to follow the guidance. In terms of my role, I'm here for support for either mixed and all the disability teams, and I think it's really important that in relation to any issues with the specific players, I'm happy to chat to clubs and the coaches to find out what reasonable adjustments can be made to ensure it's safe, but most importantly, it's enjoyable for the return of play. I'm very lucky, and I've come into this role in such a strange time, but without the support of Anne-Marie, I don't think I'd be able to do it. I've come from being a coach with Ballymena Bears and being a player with the mixed ability and Malone Tornadoes, to sort of seeing the big thing that I've took from this is the communication. Alan's touched on it, but I think the level of support that there has been between players, but also for parents, is such an enlightening thing, and something that we probably should have been doing before COVID. And it's only because of COVID that we've actually focused in, and actually rugby for a lot of these players, it's more than just a team, it's more than just a sport. It's where they get to meet their friends, it's where they get to learn new skills, and it's something that we have to take away from this, that it's such a positive thing that we're able to come back in a safe and enjoyable way. And I think that's the key point for me to sort of take on from this and sort of learn from.
One of the things that we all struggled with as this came about is just how much change there was, how quickly we were expected to change everything around daily routines. And for the focus of today's webinar and the people we're talking about, that's been difficult too. So how can a club manage that? It's a tricky one.
I think one suggestion I had was to sort of ease the anxiety and to sort of provide that reassurance is do a dry run. Invite your parents down to the club on a non-training day and walk through the protocols. Show them where the hand sanitizer is, and it also gives them an opportunity to ask you in person what their fears and how to sort of best support them. For session plans, we have session plans that are sort of given within the guidelines that I'm happy to share, but I think it's also important that you share it amongst all your coaches and helpers and give them an opportunity to see how the sessions will flow, how you're going to move from one drill to the next drill, how you're going to manage your players, and sort of have that conversation between your helpers before you actually step on the pitch. The guidelines are detailed, but I think with some really simple planning, it's very much easy to come back in a safe and enjoyable way. I think it's really down to your sort of planning side of things of how that works.
I think, a dry run, it's just a really simple, really practical thing. And, giving a sense to all players of what something might look like when it's time to go back. Visual representation is an important that. The easy read document that you've put together that cover off the guidelines. If I can bring back in Alan here for a second as well, because there's a very specific example that Sunday as well have taken that have sought to do as well in terms of showing this is what the process will look like when you come back. Can you talk to me about that video that Sunday's Well Rebels have put together, Alan?
So, we're coming back to training on Friday, and one thing we're very conscious of, that you're not going to be able to just come in the gate and run on the field as we normally do, or come out of the dressing room. So what we've done is we've done a short video clip of somebody videoing themselves, or actually our COVID officer Jess, in her club colours, videoing herself going through the processes of walking from the gate into the entrance to the pitch, sanitizing your hands, what will happen with the balls, how they'll sanitize, and how you exit. And I suppose the reason we went and decided to do that, there is examples of us. Obviously, Munster put up a clip the other day with the underage guys going through Musgrave, our Irish Independent Park, beside us. But we decided to do it on our own ground because it's specific to us. And if you're a player who has a routine and knows the area that they're going to, and if they see the club colour, they see the club pitch, it's more relevant than it being in somebody else's pitch. And it's just to put a bit of relevance for it and put a context in it. And it's just something simple on a smartphone, put it up onto your group or whatever, or share it, and somebody has it and they can review it and watch it, and they'll be able to process it in their own time and how they want to process it.
I would like to swing back to Liam Maher's point, and we said we would, and this is something that we're all struggling with, is how to get people tuned into the fact that before you go, getting into the personal assessment declaration, and how to ensure for attending players that that's covered off.
Yeah, I mean, the COVID questionnaire is kind of the starting point, and it has to be done. So it's that point that David mentioned around the communication. Who is it sent to? There's also the paper version of it. It doesn't have to be the online version. And just making sure that you're linking with somebody who can answer those questions, because we need to understand that everybody is safe coming back to rugby. I think the video will be a nice little kind of visual way of showing people what COVID might look like when you return to the club, but it is that piece of making sure that questionnaire is answered beforehand. So coaches who are working with the teams, to make sure they're working with the COVID officer to ensure that we can get those forms filled in either online or in their paper version.
Super, thanks, Anne-Marie. Quiva put a question into the chat about practical advice for those players who would have learning difficulties, the use of coloured cones. And I have to say, I love to see it when you see somebody else contributing. So Derek has come back and said that they use coloured cones, but it's important that each line has its own colour and to not mix them up. That makes a whole pile of sense. Is there any other practical advice we can offer?
Sorry, I think it really comes down to, I know for when I'm coaching with the Ballymena Bears, it's each sort of grids but have different colours. It's how you mix up your teams, having the bib set out beforehand, even your tag set up. It's all comes down to before the session actually takes part. And I think having that flow of where the next drill is going to be. So if you know that you're sending the yellow bibs to the blue grids, well then that's where they move to. And I think that's around that movement. Don't be scared to use a whole pitch. You can use the space available to you, and I think it's such an important thing that you're just planning and knowing that your coaches know what's going to be happening. I know when I was coaching, if I sometimes like to keep the plan in my head and I don't really tell anybody, but I think the most important thing is that you want to involve everyone so that the helpers know exactly what's going to happen, because I think if they're comfortable with the session, well then it's a lot easier for them to explain it to if they're working one-to-one or they're working with a smaller pot of players, what's going to happen next. And I think colours is such a simple way. Like I know when we play tag tournaments, it's either yellow tri-lines and red sidelines, and I think it's incorporating that into your drills as well. Or if it's using channels when you're passing, if you're passing through the line, that they know that they're staying between the yellow cones and they're not allowed to move between the other cones. So I think it's little simple little tips like that are such they're easy to do, but it's sort of have to think about them to be able to put them in place.
Thanks, David. We gave you the opportunity to ask questions in advance as well. And Alison in Leinster is looking for some advice just around how the need to split players, working in pods. And this obviously comes back to kind of current restrictions where we all can work in no bigger group than 15, but that still has to include all the appropriate coaching and mentor ratios and that kind of thing as well. So just, the better ways to manage teams safely within those kind of specific guidelines that are there at the moment.
Yeah, I guess that one has come up a few times in terms of adult-child ratio or adult-to-player ratio. And always when working with people with a disability, we would suggest that you have additional helpers. Now, in the mixed ability, by virtue of the team, they're on the pitch and the players are there helping one another and supporting one another. In the tag disability, we would recommend that the ratio is dropped to 1 to 5, and that can make it more difficult to accommodate additional helpers. And that, I suppose, is the one that Dave was referring to earlier around having an area that's safe for additional helpers to be there if, a player needs reassurance or it needs a timeout, that they can safely move to another gridded area that's and they're wearing masks and they're appropriately geared up for that safe interaction. So it does probably make a little bit of a more practical kind of point that you do have to think about those numbers. But it is important when working with players with a disability that there is that additional support and help around.
I think actually that covers off a question that Lisa also asked in Leinster as well around that kind of coach-player ratio stuff as well. But Derek in Connacht had a really straightforward question that and he's asking just advice on how to manage physical and social distancing for children with a physical or intellectual disability. I mean, that can be challenging.
Yeah, and I guess it's and it's probably more one for a COVID team, but once you're following those guidelines, if you can't keep that 2 meter social distancing, then it is appropriate to be masked up and to be conscious of the amount of time that you're spending with somebody. So we're not saying that person can't get support or you can't help that person or you can't have them at the session. It's about making sure that you have some steps that both the player and the helper are protected in that sense.
Yeah. Brilliant. Look, I think we've covered off some really practical areas there. And I think exactly as you've just said there, Anne-Marie, so much of it comes back to once you have the right approach, and maybe a couple of teaspoons full of common sense, you're going to be able to navigate these waters quite handsomely. We might start look to wrap it up at this stage. Just in terms of summary, Anne-Marie, was there anything that you wanted to share?
Just like as you mentioned earlier, there are a couple of really practical comments coming in there, and just we are putting them together. We will send out the link afterwards to the homepage for the landing page for disability, and we will have the easy read guide there, the session plans, and a few other resources there as well. Particularly some people said I'm getting involved, so there's a coaching guide, there's an FAQ guide. We'll have all those out to people. However, I can see some coaches online there and some clubs that I've dealt with, and one of the biggest sources of reference in terms of clubs that are working with teams with disability has been each other. Anytime a club comes to us and says, I want to start up, we signpost them to another club, and the depth of experience that is shared is brilliant, and I don't see why this should be any different this time around. There are coaches out there that have the answers to some of those questions, so communicating with each other and collaborating to make sure that these players return safely, have a good rugby experience, and then stay involved with the club for the long haul.
I think that sums it up perfectly, and we did promise we'd have people back to the real world by just in time for 2 o'clock. So Anne-Marie, can I say thank you to you, and indeed to you, David McKay, and to you, Alan Craughwell, as well, on behalf of the 65 people on this call right now. So great to see such an interest in this topic. It's such a timely point as we all look to #ReturnToRugby. A reminder that we will be sending you some of the resources that we have outlined on this call, including a copy of the webinar itself. That will be shared directly back to the email address with which you used to register for this. Thank you so much, you guys. Thanks everybody for attending. Go safe and go well. We'll talk to you soon.